Hey, welcome to the Elle Russ Show. My name is Elle Russ, and I am a #1 best-selling author and master coach. My intention is to inspire, educate, and motivate you with weekly content featuring amazing guests and solo episodes. Visit my website, elleruss.com, to learn more about me, my courses, free masterclasses, partner discounts, and much more. Enjoy the show. All right, so today I'm going to talk about the negative impact of gluten on autoimmune disorders specifically. So I don't have an autoimmune disorder. And a lot of people think that I might, just because Hashimoto's is a autoimmune disorder that affects the thyroid. It's very common. So sometimes people in their mind equate hypothyroidism with Hashimoto's. They're the same but different, meaning they are both hypothyroidism, but one is caused by an immune system issue, and the other is just caused by a variety of potential factors, some of which you may never get to the bottom of. But let's talk about the negative impact of gluten on autoimmune disorders, because it's very, very profound. And it really is something that you have control over. All right. So it's linked to so many different things, and people don't understand why. And they'll be like, yeah, I hear gluten's bad for you, but like, really? Okay, so like, fine, I've been mostly gluten-free. I ate like once a week, I ate gluten. Let me just tell you more about this topic. And if you are struggling with an autoimmune disorder, you may really want to consider. Of course, this is not medical advice, but you really may want to consider talking to a paleo doctor, MD, about limiting grains, but particularly gluten. All right, so we have to understand the connection. First of all, what is gluten? It's a protein, and it is found in wheat, barley, rye, and okay, that obvious, like, all right, we get that. Gluten, people think of bread and pasta and things like that. All right. It's also in other stuff because wheat is in soy sauce. So there's gluten in soy sauce, but you wouldn't think of that because you don't think of soy sauce as being like wheat, rye, or barley, right? So anything that would have wheat in it would have gluten in it. So a teriyaki sauce might, and other things like that. So this is not a lecture in where to find gluten in all the places that it is. It's a lot of places, but we can kind of go, okay, gluten makes sense. Now, autoimmune disorders, what are these things? Essentially, they are just conditions where the body's immune system makes a mistake. And when it makes a mistake, it starts to attack healthy cells or tissues, organs. So let me go through some examples of autoimmune disorders. Let's take rheumatoid arthritis. So this is an autoimmune disorder that causes inflammation in the joints, meaning the person's immune system makes a mistake and it starts to attack the joints. Okay. So, and there's been studies published in the arthritis research and therapy journals found that people with rheumatoid arthritis who follow a gluten-free diet really have improved symptoms. I would take the famous case of Seamus Mullen, who adjusted his diet and cured himself of rheumatoid arthritis. You can put yourself in remission for that, or Hashimoto's. And what do I mean by that? That means that, like, for example, I had a client the other day who now, after several years, no longer tests positive at all for having Hashimoto's autoimmune disorder. Meaning, when they take the antibody tests, their antibody tests look like mine, like you don't have it. And that's the goal of everybody who has an autoimmune disorder. So for rheumatoid arthritis, it would be the RA factor test or whatever other test they use to assess whether someone has it. Then, of course, there's the obvious one, celiac. So this is really sort of the easiest autoimmune disorder in the sense that if you can completely stay away from the thing, gluten, you're going to be pretty good. However, in this day and age, depending on where you live, it can be difficult. So this causes damage to the small intestine. So if gluten is consumed, then again, immune system makes a mistake and starts attacking the small intestine. All right, so celiacs, you might think, okay, that's easy. You just stay away from gluten and then you don't have a problem. But if they can continue to consume it, even in small amounts, or they have like, oh, well, whatever, I just have one episode a year, they have an increased risk of developing other autoimmune diseases, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, all sorts of other crazy, horrible stuff. So there are some people who have celiac, and most people do take it seriously because they get quite ill. But if they have a mild reaction from eating a little and do it anyway, the idea that I'm trying to express here is like anything else, like with sugar. You keep poking the bear, it's going to attack you. You keep poking the pancreas by eating too much sugar, it's eventually going to give up and you have type 2 diabetes. You keep poking your celiac, and eventually you're going to get other things. Now, there's also non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So that's where someone might experience symptoms similar to like a celiac after consuming gluten, but they don't have the intestinal damage that it does. So those are two separate things. Now, I've mentioned Hashimoto's briefly, but that also is an autoimmune disorder where the immune system makes a mistake and starts to attack the thyroid gland. And that we know for sure gluten contributes to those antibodies. So when you remove gluten, the antibodies drop. It's really something else to see. All right, so let's just talk about like, why does this happen? I mentioned a few autoimmune disorders, what they are, how it works. So like, why does this happen? Why would when gluten enters the body, someone with an autoimmune disorder, like, why gluten, right? Of all the things. So it does all of this in basically, there's several potential ways that it does this. All right. The first one is called, you might have heard it, molecular mimicry. All right. So this is just a process where like a foreign substance, such as a protein from food, like gluten, resembles a component of the body's tissues. Okay. So again, molecular mimicry is when something like, again, like gluten, a protein that's in a food, resembles a component of the body's tissues. And this similarity, this little structural similarity, it's just similar, leads to this immune system making the mistake. And it mistakenly identifies this body's tissue as foreign and starts to launch an immune attack against it. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's this like structure similarity, molecular mimicry, and that happens when you consume gluten, particularly if you have an autoimmune disorder, an immune system that's already bound to make mistakes or is currently making mistakes. It's not to say it's forever going to make a mistake. I just told you there are people who have gotten Hashimoto's and now test negative for it. Sometimes you could live in a place with toxic mold and you could get, Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disorder. Does that mean you have Hashimoto's forever now? Not necessarily. It was mold toxicity induced Hashimoto's. You get my drift here? Either way, this is what we see. So if you have an autoimmune disorder, your immune system is likely going to make a mistake, and particularly with Hashimoto's, with thyroid, gluten really, raises the antibodies. Okay, here's another way. So molecular mimicry is just one way that this can happen. How gluten can affect someone with an autoimmune disorder. So another way is that gluten could ignite increased intestinal permeability. I know, intestinal permeability. If you're able to permeate something, you're able to go through it. You don't want your intestines to be permeable. So what's increased intestinal permeability? Gluten has been shown to increase permeability, which would be leaky gut, meaning it increases your intestinal lining sort of being permeable, meaning this permeable gut, this leaky gut, essentially, allows substances that really should be in the gut and remain in the gut, like undigested food particles, toxins, all that crap, literally crap, leak into the bloodstream. All right, so this triggers an autoimmune response as well. So that can contribute to autoimmune reactions. So we have gluten being a participant and a factor in molecular mimicry situations and in increased intestinal permeability situations, otherwise known as sort of leaky gut. All right. Then there's also just immune activation. So gluten can activate immune cells in the gut that can release inflammatory cytokines. So these things can just further contribute to intestinal damage and inflammation. Um, you've got dysbiosis and gut microbiome issues. So, an imbalance in the gut microbiome caused by this has been associated with various autoimmune disorders. So, gluten consumption, just again, in and of itself, altering the gut microbiome. This is why grains are not on a paleo, primal, ancestral, evolutionary health food list. Not any grains. And that's not to say don't ever eat a grain for the rest of your life, but you really need to be wary of gluten. And I would say take a look at grains in general. Of course, I believe in a paleo primal paradigm as being the best for healing and life in general, but we're all human. And if I'm in Paris, I'm gonna eat an open face sandwich on some French bread. I'm not gonna feel bad about it. So, um, but if I had an autoimmune disorder, I might think twice about that. And I might say, is that open faced sandwich worth it? Or is the piece of cake that's not gluten free going to be more worth it? And to me, I would probably choose the cake if I had a gluten problem. All right, so let's just talk about genetic predispositions. I mean, look, some people might carry genetic factors that make them more susceptible to this stuff in terms of developing certain autoimmune disorders. So, celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So certain genes are associated strongly with celiac disease risk. Epigenetic factors, so epigenetic changes. So environmental factors, diet that could impact things aside from gluten. So gluten consumption just can really potentially lead to all sorts of issues. It's not to say that everybody gets the issues when they eat gluten, but most people with autoimmune disorders have some sort of issue with that and would just do better without it. And, listen, in some cases, it may not be gluten alone, but rather the combination of gluten and other dietary components, like perhaps, dairy or other even non-gluten grains. I mean, listen, my doctor, Dr. Forsman, will quote unquote prescribe to almost everybody, particularly anyone dealing with gut issues, that they go paleo to remove the grains. There's corn, all that stuff. Well, maybe corn's gluten free, but it's still a grain. And again, you're talking about exacerbating or already pouring gasoline onto a fire by introducing grains into a gut that is suffering. So the quickest way to heal that, and then that's not to say you'll never be able to eat another grain or corn in the future, etc., is to say that how quickly do you want to get better? So sometimes, and that is really why my doctor does, and most functional medicine doctors do prescribe, hey, go grain free, go paleo. So sometimes it is something other than gluten, or it's not just the gluten, it's gluten, dairy, and basically the things that are eliminated from the paleo diet. Uh, Listen, there are just so many gluten-free and grain-free options out there, nowadays, and I don't suggest that you go out there and you eat paleo granola. I mean, there's still stuff that's high calories or can even be high carb or have sugar in it just because it's grain-free and paleo, right? But it's also, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's hidden in a lot of things. So if you want soy sauce, you got to get coconut aminos, I mean, or tamari soy sauce, because tamari it does not have the wheat, but soy sauce does. So you just really have to look at labels. You don't know that the chicken teriyaki you're getting, that teriyaki probably has soy sauce in it, which then has wheat. So even though it may be a little, but if you're someone who has an autoimmune disorder, these are the things you've got to steer clear of. So they're very connected. One of a great success story, there's so many great success stories. I mentioned Seamus Mullen earlier. Palmer Kipple is a great success story. Her cured herself of MS. She wrote a book called Beat Autoimmune. And she talks about how she quit gluten and her gut issues went away like in a week. But then after a month, her MS symptoms completely went away and have not been back. And she battled MS for like 19 years, and she's been free from suffering for a very long time and helps others now do the same. But the impact as well on my private clients of removing gluten from the diet and then watching the Hashimoto's antibodies drop as a result. And Kara Hahn, who's on my website, there's a clip of her sort of success testimonial. She's also in my book, The Paleo Thyroid Solution. She was already treated on thyroid hormone replacement and feeling good. But there were antibodies lingering in the background, which you don't want. Even if you can't feel them, they're sort of silent killers, right? And so she went paleo, and she was the last person to go that anyone ever thought would go paleo. She was one of those people who was like, you are never taking pasta away from me. But she quit. No doctor ever told her that. She quit grains, and literally her antibodies were the lowest she'd ever seen them in her entire life. They went from like 300, 325, something like that, which is not terrible to begin with. I mean, it's bad, but it's not like being in the thousands. Dropped down to like 25. And the range is 0 to 35 for the TPO Hashimoto's antibody. There is also another antibody called the TG antibody. On this note, if you don't know this already and you're listening to this for the first time, go to elleruss.com. And I have, right on the main page, you can roll down. There's free stuff. I have a free thyroid guide. I also have an incredibly, like, ridiculously low, amazing amazing low cost thyroid masterclass, but I have a free thyroid guide that's pretty in depth. If you just want a quick, what test do I need to get? How do I find the right doctor? You can go to freethyroidguide.com just directly if you want the guide, and then go to elleruss.com, click on courses and masterclasses, and you can see what I have to offer in terms of educating further on this topic. There are a lot of nuances around what I am saying, but a great place to start if you have any autoimmune disorder is to remove gluten particularly. And I do suggest looking into paleo. All right, we'll see you next week. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.